Hey everyone, welcome back to this rather special podcast that we're doing today. We have with us Elina, who's a young trade leader at the WTO, and we'll be talking to her about what's happening in the world in terms of trade and what's the role of the young people in it. Elina, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for hosting me today. I hope you're also doing great.
Oh, yes, I'm also great, and it's a pleasure hosting you with us today. Now, Elena, you're a young person who's working with the WTO in a large capacity. Now, there's a lot that's happening in the world when it comes to trade. You look at trade deficits that are being villainized. You look at, tariffs that are, being put up across the country. So rather, what I want to ask you is, how do you see the evolving role of the multilateral institutions as far as safeguarding the equitable trade, and most importantly, where do you see WTO going in an environment like this?
As a young trade leader, I see multilateral institutions, for example, like WTO, as guardians of fair trade and global trading system. With rising protectionism and limited regional blocs, I think it's essential for the WTO to not only defend the principle of non-discrimination, fair trade, justice, sustainability, but also to evolve, develop, and ensure that trade works for everyone, especially the vulnerable economies. Multilateral institutions' capacity to mediate, to facilitate dialogues, and convene agendas are more critical now than ever with the rising trade tariffs, rising protectionism, and just limits that are making sure that trade is rather being difficult nowadays than, for example, 10 years ago. I think it's very essential for us and the multilateral institutions to ensure that global trade systems are using for good, for collective good, rather than just being used for a tool for economic nationalism and protectionism.
So you just right now talked about how tariffs or legislative trade should be used for larger purposes rather than, let's just say, economic nationalism, right? That's how you termed it. Now, what I would want to ask you is that, see, international economic policy making, because whatever you said at the core of it, it's about how economic policies are sort of, being drafted. Now,
Mhm.
economic policy making at its very core is, let's just say, a difficult thing, right? It's a very complex thing. Now,
Yeah.
the where do you see the role of young people into this? And what do you think are some of the pressing challenges that are, that the young might be facing into this world of economic policy making?
I think we face a lot of tokenism, which is like symbolic participation into the programs, mentorship programs, and a very limited, um, I think our voices are very limited in the global capacity making and policy making. And to navigate it, I think it's very critical for us to advocate and be advocative or the global sorry, of the global fair system. For example, I see nowadays a lot of young people are going to social media, posting things, posting their opinions. And I think this is very critical and very crucial right now because I think this age, 21st century, we are finally being recognized for our actions, for our stance. And a lot of international organizations like the WTO are creating programs to include young people nowadays. For example, even this program, Young Trade Leaders, is being designed to bring young voices to see how we think, what they think, and what we see our future being like. Because it's in our hands to create a future that ensures that everyone is being involved, everyone is participating, and justice is the thing that we aim for. For example, my fair colleague, Phoebe Britton from Australia, she organized the Global Youth Consultations, a program which brought young people from all the regions of the world. So we had 8 sessions where we just talked about our opinions, where young people talked about their concerns nowadays for politics, from the regional bloc, from trade. They asked questions, and nowadays we are bringing all these voices and opinions to create a draft guidelines for international institutions like WTO to actually use them in their policy makings, so that their future actions and reforms that they're going to take, they are going to be inclusive of young people, and they're going to be inclusive of young people not just from the developed economies, but also from global south, global north, from the Southeast African countries, from the Asian countries. It's diverse and it's reflective of all the countries.
Okay. So, you talked about inclusivity and how WTO sort of focuses on ensuring that this norm is, metaphysically present at whatever the institution does. Now, I would want to ask you, let's just say, your opinion about international trade. For example, let's just say international trade is being attacked, and it is sort of being sort of termed as something that has not led to benefits to, let's just say, some nations, right? What again, so time and again, because of your background, I would sort of draw upon that. What sort of arguments would you have, let's just say, in favor of international trade? Let's just ask you upfront.
So, from my professional experience and research, I've learned that international trade enables technology transfer, it enables skills economies, and just participation into the global export diversification. And for example, 20 years ago, my country couldn't participate in the global trade and export chains. But nowadays, with regional blocks and with fair trade system and the WTO programs, we can actually export our products into the countries with very limited to zero tariffs. We even participate into the Europe's program for developing countries, where developing countries export their products with almost zero tariffs. Nowadays, the Kyrgyz exports are being seen in Hungary, being seen in Belgium, in Switzerland, Netherlands, and it's very heartwarming, I think, because it's beneficial for my country, and not only for my country, I think it's for my region and for the small and medium enterprises. And for emerging economies like Kyrgyzstan, trade offers this access to global markets that can uplift not only one sectors, but entire sectors like agriculture, services, especially when paired with fair and smart domestic policies. But the key to this is not only inclusive trade, one that supports small, medium enterprises, empowers women, and is environmentally friendly. The key is to actually use all these instruments that trade brings and utilize them for good. Because, for example, most of the countries are not using trade to its most capacity. I think we just export our products, we import our products, but I think trade is more than that. It can transform entire households, entire families. It can uplift families from being stagnant and can just give them a chance to participate and sell what they create, sell what they bring to the global markets and their nations. Trade also should not be just free, but fair and forward-looking to include everyone in the dialogue.
Okay. Now, you said that trade should not be just free, but it should also be fair, right? Now,
Yeah.
you saying that trade should be fair brings me to my next question, which is to say, now, see, trade is happening at WTO. It gets decided in the policy making at the WTO. And I'm sure that there must be a lot of trade-offs when negotiations are happening and a lot of multilateral trade-offs. What can you tell us about what are these trade-offs, right? And again, where do young people come into this? What do you have to say on that?
I think the most complex one, if not the most, if not the most difficult one, is involving liberalization with development needs, especially for vulnerable economies like Kyrgyzstan, like the Global South. For instance, how much policy space developing countries can retain while also committing to global rules that the WTO sets. Other dilemmas involve agricultural subsidies, intellectual property, digital trade. I think it's very hard to balance between the needs of development because we don't have the same capacity of developing countries. Developed countries, they all they already have the capacity to follow the guidelines, follow the rules that are often established in the global arena. But we need to firstly get to their level, and by getting to their level is very difficult when you don't have enough knowledge, then you don't have enough practice, expertise, when you don't have enough tools. And I think that's why the trade needs to be more inclusive to developing countries. It needs to be more fair for us to follow the rules. We need to have more instruments. We need to have more guidelines and mentorship in that sense. And young leaders can influence these outcomes by advocating. And I think advocating is one of the most biggest and one of the most strongest rules and tools that we can actually use, and that are actually in our capacity and our hands. For example, we can demand transparency in the global decision making. We can demand coherence and development for sensitive reforms for the vulnerable economies. We can amplify marginalized voices, propose innovative ideas, and just bring lived experience that we experience to the negotiating table.
Okay. Now, even so, when you said that there is a trade-off between, let's just say, liberalization and development needs, personally, if I talk about myself, I also think that that's one of the most foundational sort of, it's like a tension pillar, it's like a moral dilemma because you do have arguments in favor of liberalization, but at the core of it, you also want, country, let's just say, which you come from, or even if you talk about in India's case, right, or let's just say 20 years back, if you talk about India, that's the same dilemma that you face. Like, you want to develop yourself, but also follow liberalization. And while the two do meet somewhere, they're not the same circle, right? They do have differing connotations. Now, with that, what I would want to come for is you also talked about digital trade, right? And
Mhm.
digital trade is now becoming a lot more complex. And it's also something, digital trade as a practice has been challenging the policy making, right? So do you think the policy is catching up to, let's just say, the technology and most particularly digital trade? What do you think about that?
I think digital trade is a very transformative power, but developing countries lack the actually capacity and face very limited and structural challenges like digital infrastructure gaps, regulatory systems, and just limited digital literacy. If addressed, I think it's very concerning because these gaps can deepen global inequality. We can even see it now between the gaps of digital literacy in the global West and global South. And that's why the WTO's discussion on e-commerce and digital trade must actually amplify and reflect development priorities, ensuring access to development needs, ensuring affordability, instruments, and capacity building. We must work towards digital trade ecosystem that are secure, open, and inclusive of developing countries because we lack these instruments, and often these instruments are actually what can uphold development levels and can actually make fair trade possible. Yeah.
Okay. Again, I think we keep coming back to the point that fair trade should be possible, right? It's just not free trade. It's also about fair trade. And that's very fair, right? Now,
Yeah.
with that, I would want to sort of ask you, let's just say, you're a young leader who's now into the economic policy making world, and also as a young person from coming from the global south, what do you think are the opportunities for us? And the other sort of question, the rather important question, is what are some of the challenges that you faced in your career right now, and what sort of advice would you have for people like yourselves, right, who are coming from the global south and who are about to enter, who wish to enter this world? Again, what are the set of challenges? What do you think they should do? And yes, your opinions on that.
I think the challenges I personally faced are often limited mentorship, limited program participation, and even if you are participating in the program, you often face tokenism, which is, as I already mentioned, is like a symbolic participation, but your voice is still not really heard, and you don't really have a power to influence this decision making and influence the participation in the program itself. But I think we must see this as not just marginalization and challenge, but as leverage tool. Emerging leaders from the global south, we personally experience this. We have this experience, we have these lessons that we bring. We carry perspective in these lived development realities. And I think it's our uniqueness. It's what we can bring to this table, what we can bring to these programs, and actually transform them from being just economic oriented to being more inclusive, to being more developing oriented. We understand the cost of marginalization and the potential of innovation. In the multipolar world, our voices are essential to reframing tool as not just knowledge, but for justice and efficiency. And I think my advice is to form alliances, to form bridges between the leaders of the global south. Because I think nowadays with protectionism, we are often separated between each other. But it's the age of AI, it's the age of social media and collaboration. And the thing that we can do is to collaborate between ourselves, firstly, to connect, to share mentorship, to share advice, to maybe even create this roundtable discussion, to create what created my fellow colleague, the Global Youth Consultation, to teach each other. And then we can bring this knowledge and experience to the global platforms, to the global multilateral organizations, for them to hear that yes, the trade is in good hands, that we are advocates, we are representative of our generation, and we want the future of trade, and we want the future of development to be bright, to be more inclusive and not exclusive like in the past centuries.
Okay. Now, let's just say we talked about the challenges and we talked about what are the things that, young people should look up to. Now, I would want to draw upon your sort of experience again. And while we've talked about challenges, what do you think are some of the competencies that, young people need to build? And more importantly, how should one go about building these, just building up themselves so that, they are able to do these things again?
I think in the age of AI and digitalization, the future demands a fusion of technical fluency and ethical clarity. It's very important to develop hard skills. Young professional must master negotiation, data analysis, how to use digital tools, how to be present in the digital media. However, we must also develop empathy, intercultural sensitivity, and strategic patience. I think this is what differentiates us from the AI and robots. This is the ultimate human experience, that we can feel empathy, we can feel the structural inequalities, and it's in our hands to actually transform it. And nowadays, with people being laid off from AI, laid off by AI and robots and just digital tools, I think it's very important to develop the soft skills that can actually differentiate you as a young person and a young professional from AI and from being just marginalized and non-human entity. Because this is the ultimate human experience, to actually want to feel empathy and want to help other people and to share your knowledge. But most importantly, also, I feel like we also need to develop courage. Courage not to just challenge inequalities and speak about them, but to imagine and transform better systems that, again, work for everyone.
You talked about how there's a danger of people being treated as a non-human entity. And,
Mhm.
I saw a video yesterday, right? I want to talk about that. And in that, it was a video from 1960s, and it was like, 12, 15-year-old children from the 1960s. And then, they were being asked about what will be your vision? How do you see the world in 2000s? And I clearly remember one of the kid, and apparently it was an 8-year-old kid who said that I think people are going to increasingly be treated as statistics, right? And
Yes.
and I was just struck, right? And that's the same thing that sort of you brought about. Now, that is a danger. That's a very big danger for young people as well. But let's just say, we've got to find ways to sort of navigate around that. Now, another thing, and I would say probably this would be the last question for us for this. podcast is, let's just say, what's your vision of the international trading world, or let's just say, how trade is happening? What's the
Mhm.
vision for the next 5 years? Like, where do you think are we going, right? Given your experiences, are we going to a better place? Are we, going to not so a better place? What do you think about that?
I think personally, future is indeed in a good hands. Maybe not for 5 years, because 5 years is a very limited and short time, but maybe for future 20 and 30 years, because as I see many young people wanting to actually uplift in their nations and being very patriotic, being very empathetic, I think the future is bright. But for the future 5 years, I think we're facing a lot of challenges that we need to address first for the future to be bright. Again, as you asked question about protectionism, tariffs, these are the very things that limit trade and limit the good things that trade can bring to the nations and to the consumers and families. So, firstly, I think that we can and must address these challenges. But then we need to envision and be more optimistic, because I think being more optimistic is what actually envisions and makes future bright. Because when you're being more optimistic, you're actually being oriented towards making good, not for you yourself, but also for your community, for your people. And I'm advocating for that really clearly. I think um, it's really important for us to advocate for our community and advocate for the good things and focus on the good things as a community and as a people, as a person.
All right. I think with that, we come to the end of our first podcast. I believe is going to be the first of many. But that was all. And I hope our viewers, which are mostly young people, they do find a lot of things to relate with. With that, I would just want to say thank you so much to you, Elina, for doing this. And we will see you again. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for hosting me again. I really enjoyed this podcast, and I think, and I hope a lot of young people will also enjoy it and use it for their own good and use it for their professional development.
Absolutely. I believe there's a lot of room for young people to do more when it comes to trade, when it comes to conversation like this. And, me representing a young institution and you being a young, person yourself, I think we have a lot more to do and we'll be following upon that. So once again, thank you so much and have a great day ahead.
Thank you. You too.